Well, I'm really sad this is over. I'm going to
Me
miss these
too.
awful people.
Yeah.
So thrilled to be talking to Dr. Ramani Dravasula. You know her better as just Dr. Ramani. She's been looking at Succession all season long through her unique expertise, her prism of narcissism, and basically every single character on this show, except for maybe Mondale the dog and
Maybe.
maybe Rava.
Maybe, and even Rava can be a little bit manipulative. So I'm thinking,
Yes.
I don't, maybe the bodyguard,
Maybe
Logan's
Jess.
bodyguard. Yeah, maybe Jess. Actually, Jess, Jess leaving to me, I
Yeah.
really loved that. I think also maybe the bodyguard, Logan's bodyguard. And at the very, very first episode, the family that worked on their estate and how they sort of taunted them with the home run and the watch
Right.
and all that. I don't think they were
Right.
narcissistic.
Seems like forever ago. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so much happened. We're so thrilled to have you here. Spoilers abound. So if you've not
Mm-hmm.
yet watched the Succession finale, may want to come back. Maybe you just like to know. Some folks just like to know ahead of
Yes, they
time.
do. Yes, they
We
do.
do, but we do a ton of TV recaps on our Patreon. We are doing The Bear this summer. We are finishing up Ted Lasso this week. We do like The Last of Us. We'll do Secret Invasion this summer. So come on back and visit our Patreon. We'll have a link to that down below, but wanted to share this with the whole wide world. Dr. Ramani, did this turn out the way you thought it might?
It did. I think that what we've got to remember is all narcissism stories are tragedies, right? They don't ever end well. In many of my books and in my teachings, I always talk about the parable of the scorpion and the swan, right? Where the scorpion asks all the other birds for a ride across the river, but only the vain swan takes him because the scorpion says, I'm not going to hurt you. Why would I hurt you? I just want to get to the other side of the river. And as he gets to the other side of the river, he stings the swan, and swan's like, you told me you wouldn't. And he's like, I'm a scorpion. Scorpions sting.
Mm-hmm.
So they're always tragic stories. And so I knew there was no way this deal it had to go, right? Because none of them were capable of running this company,
Right.
and not for the right reasons. And in many ways, Lucas was a lot like Logan. They're both moderately psychopathic, and they both build something from nothing, right? So they had that parallel, which I think that sort of almost made more sense that Lucas would be the heir apparent to this. And that really what was keeping the three Roy siblings in the game of wanting to take the company over was that trauma bonded relationship they forever had with their father. It was never about the company. It was about this strange ongoing jousting at windmills they were doing around their father, even though their father was dead. It didn't matter. It was never about the company. And any one of the three would have run it into the ground.
Right. It was retroactive striving for the approval that they were never going to get from him.
No.
And they even addressed that by the pool. Like, do you even want it? Like, that's something they talk about. So let's start from the beginning. I was thinking about how this has really come full circle in terms of Kendall scrambling to get the votes. We're back in that boardroom. We're back on the phone. It's like the coup of trying to overtake his father. He's back there again, hustling. And I feel like that's a comfortable place for Kendall to not have to deal with feelings or insecurities. He's hustling. He's being profane. That all makes sense. Right. He thinks he has the votes again, and he does not. Shiv, in her conversation with Lucas, I think inadvertently gets him the job when she describes him as plausible corporate matter. Because that's all he wants. He wants a puppet, right? And even when he interviews Tom over dinner later on, and he enjoys toying with people the way that Logan did, like, pitch me on you. How would you be? And when he says I could take a lot of pain, and that with also Shiv saying like he's fine, this is the like puppet front man that you want. And so it's funny that this ends up being Tom. Did you ever hear the baseball theory with Tom? Have you heard this?
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And you always kick yourself when you don't get you're like, I should have Googled his last name, because it's almost like the White Lotus where they had the whole storyline where, she was wearing the same dress as the character from The Godfather was wearing, when the car blew up kind of thing. So like, first of all, I applaud the storytellers for having that kind of attention to detail. To me, that's the artistry of it. But I did hear that story, and I thought, wow. And the whole thing that it was the first time somebody had done an unassisted triple play during the World Series, and it was 3 people that he was taking out. I mean, the brilliance of that. And yet the name still was plausible as sort of like that kind of not particularly elegantly waspy Midwest name is what he had, you know? And so it all fit, but I never thought to look for it. So I thought, but I heard about it. Yeah.
I didn't believe it. I thought that's an amazing conspiracy theory, but I didn't think it could be true. I kind of thought cousin Greg was going to come out on top because he is ruthless. He is ideologically aligned with ATN and Mencken if he's willing to sue Greenpeace for his inheritance. He's a Roy, but without the baggage. He has insinuated himself fully. He's everywhere all the time. And like, he knows just enough to be dangerous, as we see here, which we'll get to in a bit. I thought, you know, wouldn't it be perfect in this world that like the most mediocre white man would fail upward to the highest heights? You know? And that's what Tom ends up being, actually.
And that's what Tom is, that guy. Yes. You know, I think that if they had, it wouldn't have been a plausible storyline to have Greg do it. He was too green.
It's too silly.
He was too young. It was too silly. Exactly. I thought the same as you, but you got to remember, Greg is a fascinating dark horse. He's got the goods on Tom. He never shredded all the documents.
Right.
So he has all those cruise documents. So he'll always have one over on Tom. Tom has to keep him close. I think Greg it's a little bit like Roman in this way. And maybe Roman even more so has some ideology that he cares about no one. I don't even think Greg has an ideology. I don't even think he's evolved enough for that. Greg is almost like a sort of like an invertebrate sea creature that just sort of eats whatever comes along. Like, I don't even think Greg is that evolved to do that. I think that he has clever bits he does. Like, he turns on the app, he figures out what people are doing. He thinks he's playing both sides. You know, I really think he believes that, and there's a bumbling quality, but I don't even think he has an ideology per se. I just think he's going to look anywhere he needs to be able to make money. And and then I think in Tom, there's probably a grudging, strange admiration towards Greg, because Greg is a betrayer just like Tom. And I think that there is a sort of sick, the Disgusting Brothers, right? Yeah. They're both sort of outsiders, and Tom used Greg to regulate by really bullying him since the beginning.
And he'll always have somebody lower than him on the pecking order if Greg is there. Tom can be CEO, but will still have that the inferiority complex that he needs to beat up on Greg.
He's incompetent. That's the problem. And I think that we are in an era of many, many incompetent people failing upwards. Like you said, the sort of the milquetoast, paper doll cutout, one-dimensional white guy who fails upwards. That's Tom. And I think that, you know, and I think he's a trope for a lot of people we see, but he is completely and utterly incompetent, which is totally to Lucas's advantages, because I think that Lucas's psychopathy is such that he knows that with incompetent Tom, even though whatever need there is, for example, a network needing to be run by an American and all that, this is now Lucas being able to come in and do whatever he wants. So he knew he couldn't do that with Shiv. Shiv would have given him more of a fight. I think he very much saw Shiv's intelligence. And in a way, he knew also, I mean, Lucas was no fool, that he was now going to get two for the price of one. He was going to have Tom's, you know, be a great placeholder and incompetence, but Shiv's rather cruel. I mean, Shiv's psychopathic too. So Shiv's cruelty and historical knowledge and family knowledge of that business, Lucas gets all of what he wanted.
Yeah, but Tom is craven enough, though, to want the prestige of this gig, to want the title and the money. And so he's happy to like be the one that gets beaten up out front. So once Shiv realizes they're all at Caroline's house in Barbados. And once Shiv realizes what has happened because Greg has tipped off Kendall. I love, by the way, that Greg uses technology against Lucas. That's so funny to me. That's like Lucas is like the high-tech app guy, and all Greg had to do was use Google Translate to get the goods on him. I feel like somewhere deep down, we get glimmers of the three of them and what might have been if they had a normal sibling connection, right? Like by the pool, when Shiv is devastated to learn that she's being forced out, I do feel like, yes, they're still jockeying. And Kendall wants to use this moment to ascend, but there's like a big brother kind of caring, I think, where he feels, I think they all kind of feel something for each other from time to time. And even like in the kitchen, you get these glimmers of like what they might have been like as kids playing in that house, you know, like messing with their mom and licking the cheese. And like, that's what's so heartbreaking is that here and there you see a slight crack into what a nice life would have been.
Well, I think that was such an amazing device they used, because I think anybody who grew up in a narcissistic family system would say, you know what? I see that so much of the poison between me and a sibling was really caused by a parent's triangulation, you know, and I think that when you come from, I mean, they had two narcissistic parents, right? They had both Logan and Caroline. I mean, it couldn't be a worse way to possibly grow up. And so you know, and I think that what it also does is it sets us up for that sense of we want them to be, I mean, again, we sort of this empathic projection into the story. We want them to have a good moment. We want them to get along, right? I think that that's what most people want, but you have to know because of their personalities, it's never going to be possible. It's an impossibility. So that the showrunners and the writers take us into that moment where it looks like it could work, and then they take it away, which I thought was so interesting because we are on the ride experiencing that grief and the reality of what these relationships are. But that's happened more than a few times. They'd even have these poignant moments like, you know, remember when you dropped the dime on me with Dad and the chocolate milk and all of that. You can see that they had these shared sorts of memories all along, but it was, again, their father could never afford for the three of them to have an alliance, right? That would have been too much. So his sport was constantly, you know, creating these divisions. And this happens in narcissistic family systems all the time. So you're right. Three siblings who had healthy parents, or even one healthy parent, would have had a chance of creating that sort of warm space. They would have those tiny little moments. And I honestly think, though, the reason they had that moment was at that moment, they were united against a common enemy, you know, and they'd only have their good moments when they were united against a common enemy. And so the way you can kind of have that narcissistic love, as it were, is to have that common enemy.
Right. Because they're also looking out for themselves in that moment of joy. Yeah. So yeah, we get the Kendall, it's me speech. They get, we anoint you. And then we get a lot of like, I think very satisfying iconography in them all arriving on the same plane together. They're all dressed in black. They're all on their phones. They get into their Escalades. The music is playing, and it's like, it takes us back to what was hooking us in the beginning, like how flashy, how lavish it is, what a window into this crazy world. And so they give us that for a moment until there's yet another twist. The highs and lows in this were just like sickening, dizzying, thrilling all over again. But then they have a nice moment when they go back to their dad's townhouse, which is now Connor's townhouse. And they're watching the video that, you know, Connor has been playing. And they're sitting again, like the three of them with one another's hands on their shoulders, very similar to the image we saw at the end of season 3 when Kendall tells him about the killing and he's on the ground. I like that Connor's going to Slovenia. He was going to say no to the Slows, but now he's going to Slovenia, which is...
Well, if Mencken is president.
That's true. The Wisconsin stuff going on.
Yeah.
That's true. That is true. But then there's that fantastic showdown, the subtle kind of what they're not saying showdown between Tom and Shiv, where Shiv acknowledges this not going to be her, and Tom has got to pretend, oh, I didn't know that. And then he says, oh, it's me. And Shiv tells him, oh, it's Greg that told me this. Yeah. And then they literally bitch slap each other in the powder room.
Disgusting, brothers. Just being disgusting.
That was so funny. And then we see them all, you know, they all have the showdown back at the Waystar Royco headquarters, and they're both like geared up for a fight. Kendall thinks he's got the votes, and of course Mattson thinks he's got the votes. But the way that Roman reacts when he sees Jerry is just like, it's visceral, and it makes him panic all over again. Like he was doing okay. I know that you've spoken quite eloquently about how Roman is the most trauma bonded. And I feel like there was an allusion early on to Roman saying, Connor molested me when I was a kid. And they're all like, oh, no, that you're remembering that wrong. Like, again, the pieces of memories from childhood that come up that give us a glimpse into what happened. I feel like that maybe actually happened. And it's never been elaborated on, but I feel like that's where the source of his sexual stuntedness.
I mean, something happened to him when he was a kid.
Comes
something
from,
happened. Yeah.
Because Jerry triggers him. Just the very sight of Jerry, like from far away through glass, triggers him. And like a reminder of like all the unhealthy stuff. anyway. And that's what makes him sob finally.
Well, Jerry is a stimulus for Roman's shame, right? So narcissistic person is just, it's a volcanic cauldron of shame, right? And that shame is always pushing back against these defenses of grandiosity, entitlement, arrogance, the sense of I'm perfect. They have to maintain this idealized vision of themselves because the shame threatens to destroy them from within. And when in Jerry's very presence catalyzes all that shame in him, number one. But number two is she kind of has his number. She actually sees him accurately. Towards the end, the father's entire sort of conception of Roman was as the sort of a pervert, that there's something sort of like there was something deviant about him
with the dick pics.
Yes, yes, and all of it. It sounds, the way they were talking is almost like there was more of a deeper story there, right? But Jerry was in some ways on, like, in a way, if you remember earlier seasons, it was like, we're going to get up there together. I'm going to, I can back you as the person in the family. And Roman kind of messed all of that up too. Remember, Jerry was a mothering figure to him as well. So it was, very, very complicated, sort of space, but it was, Roman is such a damaged person. And so it's but Jerry was such a stimulus for his shame. And when he saw her, the shame would be just too overwhelming. He simply could not be in that presence and he would crumble.
That was such a powerful moment to see him sob like that. And there's nowhere to hide because it's all glass offices, right? And he's like bleeding all over again. Anyway, he's physically injured. He's emotionally injured. It's a very dramatic moment. And Kieran Culkin was just incredible all season long, but especially in these last two episodes. And then they're voting, right? And like, you think that Kendall's got the vote and Shiv she wobbles, and that's so dramatic. And what you realize later on when she goes in the other office and they have this big shouting match is that she would rather be close to power and married to the guy who is willing to screw her over than see her own brother take it all.
100%. But because you got to remember too, I mean, in many ways, Shiv was destined to be her mother. And she's about to be her mother, married to the CEO, embittered, angry, manipulative, cruel. She'll be a terrible mother, just like her mother was a terrible mother. All of that is destined in Shiv's story. And but absolutely, because I think for Shiv, she's always looking for the cracks. Shiv was the most like her father of any of the siblings. She and I think that to me, that was always an interesting, even her name, Shiv, right? Shiv is a prison knife, right? So, I mean, I think that it's that it was such an interesting trick, right? Because Shiv is a woman. We wouldn't have thought she was the one who had these most toxic, antagonistic, psychopathic qualities, but she's the one who did all along. It was very, very apparent. Early on, I remember when there was Shiv would walk around parroting how much she cared about women's rights in those early episodes.
Right, when
and
she
then
was liberal.
She screwed that, when she screwed that woman over, to shut her up, the woman who was going to speak out publicly about the amount of harm she had experienced, I think, in the cruise ship part of the business. And she went and she manipulated her into silence. So that's where we really saw how darkly, cruelly manipulative what she is, and systemically so. Roman goes after the low hanging fruit. Things like, attacking Kendall's children, things like
shocking.
That. Yes. Those sorts of those kinds of, you like to think no fly zones, like kids are always off limits. So, but Roman would do anything to draw blood. Shiv plays a longer game. And so I think that with her, she was willing to do the things that her father would have done, and right to the very end, and would throw her brother under the bus. And, Kendall didn't play that moment well. I had even spoken about it myself in my own video, which is this idea of Kendall made it about, all about himself. Right. I was made for this. I need this. And, to do that, it was almost as though he was thinking that Shiv would have some belief in his competence and have empathy for him. And what I think that those three siblings always forgot that everybody's in it for their own power, even though that's their own motivation. But Kendall could have manipulated her at that moment if he didn't make it about himself, but he just couldn't help himself. They're all very impulsive in that way.
Right. He's like, I don't know who I am without this.
Correct.
That's not Shiv's problem.
That's not exactly. And even, let me put it this way. A nice person might have had that conversation, maybe not under those conditions, but definitely not Shiv. So it's sort of Kendall almost getting overwhelmed by his agenda. But what it did show us was that it was his agenda. And in a sick, twisted way, that this might have been the better path to sell off. Because, again, the thing we have to always remember, these people are getting billions of dollars now, right? And so, and with that billions of dollars, all the rest of us mere mortals would be more than happy. But for him, it was the identity of being in that role, of basically playing at his dad. Look at the scene when he sat in his father's seat and sort of tentatively was turning it this way and that, he was, it really was, he felt like it was going to be a coronation.
As he explains, when he was 7 years old, his dad sat him down and was like, this is going to be yours. That's got to mess somebody up when you're 7, right? So I was thinking all the time in this episode about something that you say about narcissists, which is that they don't ever change. And so all 3 of these people are exactly who they were the first second we saw them. They're all self-preservational. Kendall feels entitled. This belongs to him. This is who he is. Shiv is willing to destroy them all. And Roman's just nihilistic. I mean, he literally says, we're nothing. We're bullshit. We're nothing. And so they're all exactly who they were in the very, very beginning. But Tom kind of evolved, right? Tom kind of rose to the occasion in a way that he would be palatable as he learned how to survive, right? He's not different, but he became cannier and knew how to survive in this world better than he did in the beginning when he awkwardly gave Logan the watch.
Correct. He did learn to survive in the world. I agree with that. And the evolution of Tom, though, was he almost had this talented Mr. Ripley ability to sort of, play to his role, right? He didn't try to come in there. His bumblingness almost became disarming. And so there was a simultaneous, there was sort of a little bit of an underestimation of him. Now, listen, he is incompetent. That part stands. With the ATN, that election, I think, showed us how incompetent he is. So it's not that he ever became competent, but it was that what he and Tom, actually, what Tom was able to do that most normal people are not, is to betray with abandon. That's why him and Shiv, to me, are actually the ultimate dysfunctional sadomasochistic power couple, because they're exactly the same person in many ways. They will betray anybody to get to where they need to go. And so they're almost twins in that fashion. And I think that there's a sick, grudging admiration one may have for the other in the ability to do that. So I think that, and what Tom really got canny about was to take what was already in his character to be this sycophant and then now polish it up. And that's how he got to where he was. It's how he ended up marrying Shiv.
Yeah. And you see in that shot of them sitting side by side, not even really holding hands, just barely touching, they're not happy. They've got it all. He's got it all. And they're not happy.
She's
never
were.
No, never. And they never will be. And she's like, congratulations. And he's like, oh, no. And he puts a hand out really tentatively. And she very lightly puts hers in his. And that is going to be the representation of their alliance from now on. They're together, but not really bonded to each other.
Correct. No, they're not. Because here's the thing. They don't have the capacity.
No.
Neither of them has the capacity for intimacy, that capacity for a mutual, loving, sustained, deep, trusting relationship. Not with each other, not with anybody. They simply don't have it. And so in a way, they're actually a perfect match, because it kind of takes them out of the water supply so no one else ends up with them. And so let them be with each other, because they're just such terrible people.
And then Kendall, we see, is devastated at the very end. The very last shot is of him just looking out at the water, and he's just a shell. And I think about how he goes to water a lot for soothing, for comfort. You see him floating in the Pacific in Malibu after his dad dies. He writes number 1 in the sand with his foot. He's floating. You see him floating at the end of near the end of season 3, where he's face down in the pool on the float. And then here again, you see him going to the water for some kind of, I don't know, symbolic purification, hope. But he just seems shattered at the end, and I have no idea what's going to happen to him.
Well, I think a lot of people thought he was going to end his life. And, my feeling was he died an existential death. He is gone. Do you know what I mean? He is no longer, his entire life, above and beyond any marriage, he had his children, everything was about this one moment in time to either win his father over and slide into that role, or slide into this role when he passed. And that was it. That was the only thing that motivated him. So if there's only one thing a person ever existed to do, and that thing was taken away, what happens to the person? Well, in a person with a healthy personality, a whole bunch of new doors would open.
Mm-hmm.
But for him, he only saw one path forward. So he will sort of, again, he's died an existential death. And I actually thought, I was wondering, I was like, is he going to jump into the Hudson River there? Like, is, you know,
but Colin's following him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Colin was following. So I'm like, is he going to jump? But I jump, after him. I think a lot of people thought that might happen, but I thought you didn't need to have that happen literally. It's happened metaphorically. Yeah. He's dead. And so that is and it's interesting because I think all of the rest of them in their fashion remained alive, right? Like, Connor is on whatever it's bizarre transactional marriage, ambassadorship, delusion he's living. Shiv is obviously in her psychopathic rant. Roman is on his sort of deviant, malignant narcissistic thing. But Kendall was completely held together by this anticipation. So, someone like him, he will never come back from that. Like this is, I think that in people's lives, there are pivot events, things that happen that define a life, and they're chance events, something like a person has a car accident or something like that. This was his, and there's no coming back from that, from this. I mean, this will take years off his life. Like if we were talking about real people, I'd be like, this is a dude that's going to die prematurely.
I have over and over again felt sorry for Kendall, and I felt bad for him here too.
Mm-hmm.
They're all awful people, but I feel bad for Kendall.
And I think that's very interesting you say that, because Kendall really is the vulnerable narcissistic person, right? Mm-hmm. Victimized, sullen, resentful, grudging entitlement. But then that arrogance pops up every so often, that this sort of beaten down kind of version of him, it would pull for that from anybody. And in fact, it's why people get into relationships with people like him, because they pity him. And they're like, well, there's got to be someone in there. And then they'd just be on this wild ride. And he was the person who was once married and then isn't married. And I think we kind of think she was a normal-ish woman. I mean, she seems, they're all narcissistic on the show.
I can fix him, maybe she thought.
Right. Maybe she thought that. But whatever it was, is that it was definitely we do feel sorry for him, and yet he's a terrible person. And I thought that was actually a brilliant twist they had in the show. And it reminds us how people say, how do people get in relationships with narcissistic people if they're so terrible? Because a lot of people pity them. Like there's things that they're drawn to, and then they feel sorry for them. And when we feel sorry for people, we don't walk away from them.
Yeah. Was this good? Were you satisfied with the ending?
Was I satisfied with the ending of the show? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really was, because it's so interesting you asked me that question. Mm-hmm. I sat with it for a minute and I thought to myself, shows like Succession are what we call in psychology a projective test. We project unconscious conflicts within ourselves into the show. And that's why some people will be satisfied with this ending and others will not. Mm-hmm. For some strange reason, because of my own life history and my issues of trauma bonding, I wanted Kendall to become the CEO. I really dislike Lucas. I don't like the whole tech bro persona. I really dislike Lucas. I really disliked Shiv. So I almost felt like I wanted Kendall to have his chance, because like you said, I pitied him. And I sat with that for a minute. I'm like, well, this wasn't actually the best way it could have gone. I actually think the way they ended the story was Kendall was always a tragic figure. You couldn't have him triumph at the end. It doesn't make sense from a storytelling perspective. And then I saw the parallel between Lucas and Logan. That this was the next generation of a cruel, relentless, manipulative, toxic, like I said, psychopathic kind of leader who built something up from nothing. In Logan's day, it was newspapers and things like that. In Lucas's day, it's tech apps and all this other stuff. But they were on. So in many ways, Lucas was more of an heir apparent than his own children were.
And this show is not about, I don't think, being satisfying. I think it's about harsh truths. And the harsh truth is, as we said early on, is like the mediocre white dude fails upward.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, and we understand what it was like. And I think that's what where we see that mediocrity, mediocre people failing upward more than anywhere else in our world is politics. Even more than business in some ways. I think even in the business world, you got to have some chops. You may be cruel, psychopathic, and malignant, but I think a lot of people you don't see people failing upwards in business the way you see them failing upward in politics. So I think that's where we're seeing it. And it was a very politically focused show, but I think that it also was that reminder that there are lots of Toms out there, that there are these sort of the puppet where strings are being pulled by someone far more malevolent in a back room that we don't get to see. And that's how, I think many businesses are probably run. We just don't know the machinations, but in politics, it's all out there. And there's so many politicians like that.
Well, I'm really sad this is over. I'm going to miss these awful people.
Yeah,
I'm going to miss hearing that song.
I'm going to miss it too. I'm going to have to go back.
I know. I wish we had been doing this all season long because this has been so much fun talking with you. Maybe we can find another addictive show to dig into.
Let's do it. We got to find another.
For sure. You are the best. We will, of course, link to all your stuff. Dr. Ramani, you do such great work. And I'm so thankful to you for taking time on this busy, emotional evening to chat with me. So thank you so much.
Thank you.